The fate of 13-year-old Madeline Soto came to an unexpected and tragic end. Law enforcement agencies in Orange County, Florida, initiated urgent investigations with minimal initial information from the girl's mother, Jennifer, and her partner Stephen. As the investigative process unfolded and evidence gradually accumulated, shocking circumstances began to emerge that led to fatal consequences for young Maddie. This presented story is an extremely emotional narrative that captured the attention of both American and international communities. It is crucial to emphasize that this is an extremely sensitive account that may cause psychological tension. We strive to highlight the circumstances as accurately as possible, avoiding unnecessary dramatization. On February 22, 2024, Madeline Soto turned 13. Her birthday celebration took place within the family circle, at a relative's home in Central Florida. The girl's permanent residence was in the Venetian Bay Village residential complex in Kissimmee, located south of Orlando. Maddie attended Hunter Creek Middle School. While not among the top academic performers, the pedagogical staff characterized her as an extremely pleasant and friendly student who simultaneously struggled with concentration. At 13, she was diagnosed with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. The girl openly shared with those around her that the prescribed medications caused pronounced drowsiness, as a result of which she independently discontinued taking them. Teachers repeatedly drew attention to her exhausted state during the educational process. Maddie often sat with her head down, eyes closed. Among her peers, she was perceived as an emotionally vulnerable personality. Her friends often noticed periods of lowered mood, spontaneous crying without obvious reasons, and periodic complaints about her relationship with her mother. In conversations, she characterized Jennifer as a person with bipolar disorder, emphasizing frequent conflict situations between them. At the same time, she maintained an extremely warm relationship with her mother's boyfriend, Stephen Stearns, maintaining regular telephone and video communication throughout the day. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual, but at the beginning of 2024, in conversations with friends, Maddie began to express quite unexpected intentions, a desire to leave her parental home. She detailed plans to build her own dwelling in the forest and live there completely independently. Monday, February 26, the day after her birthday, became a turning point. Jennifer Soto went to Hunter Creek Middle School, intending to pick up her daughter. She waited for students near the institution but quickly realized that Maddie was not among them. Assuming the possibility of the child being at her mother's location, Jennifer headed to the cafe owned by her father and located near the educational institution. Maddie occasionally visited this place after classes. However, the girl was not found there either. The school administration, after a thorough check of attendance logs, officially confirmed Maddie was not present in classes that day. Immediate large-scale search operations were launched in the county, both using automotive transport and on foot. Around 4:30 in the evening, the situation surrounding Madeline Soto's disappearance had reached a critical point. The 911 emergency service received a phone call from two unidentified women representing the concerned mother of the girl. The call was made from an office building located near the educational institution. Jennifer and others were waiting for law enforcement to arrive, as all possible search locations had been exhausted, and no traces of Maddie's whereabouts had been found. The dialogue with the emergency dispatcher unfolded as follows. "You are calling on behalf of the parents regarding a missing child?" "Yes, on behalf of the mother." "Please specify when the child was last seen." "She was last seen near the church close to Hunter Creek Middle School." "It seems to be a peace church, but I cannot guarantee the precise address." "Does the child have a mobile phone with her?" "No, she intentionally left it at home today." The callers emphasized the urgency of the situation, as the child had been missing since the morning, and they had already called 3 times. Their concern continued to grow. "We understand we are waiting for the police. Tell us, how much longer do we have to wait? This is a missing child." The dispatcher's response was quite formal, "I understand, but I cannot specify an exact arrival time." Law enforcement officers arrived at the scene only around 8 o'clock in the evening. Several people were near Jennifer, including her partner Stefan, who were helping in the search for her daughter. Jennifer emotionally recounted the details. She was supposed to be taken to school but never made it there. I came to pick her up, but she didn't come out. They called her name over the loudspeaker, and I thought maybe she was somewhere here, as she sometimes visited this office. I came here, no one was around. I returned to the school, but everything was already closed. Later, the woman received an email from the educational institution about her daughter's absence that day. She also directly contacted the class teacher, who confirmed Maddie's absence from classes. Teachers have a time window until 3:30 p.m. to enter attendance data. Jennifer's automatic notification about her daughter's absence was sent only at 5:30 p.m. By this point, Madeline had already been missing for almost 8 hours. The mother was in a state of pronounced panic, walking around the surrounding territories searching for her daughter, repeatedly calling law enforcement. At that moment, she was wearing a green hoodie, white Crocs, and black shorts. Later, law enforcement discovered that Stefan had driven Maddie to school that morning. He clarified details about her clothing. Jennifer noted that Maddie was wearing black shorts, which indirectly suggested that she had seen her daughter before she left for the educational institution, a circumstance that would later be called into question. On her phone, Jen found the last photo of Maddie, taken the day before during a birthday celebration. According to the mother, forgetting her mobile phone at home was typical for her daughter, which was associated with symptoms of her diagnosed ADHD. During her communication with law enforcement, the woman inquired about technical devices. Does she have an Apple Watch or another gadget? No, the only device is a school tablet. It can be tracked. I think if it's turned off, it will try to connect to the network. Maddie's school laptop had a geolocation function, although it had not been turned on since the Sunday before her disappearance. Stefan provided law enforcement with detailed testimony about the circumstances of driving Maddie to the educational institution, reporting that he dropped her off around 8:30 to 8:40 in the morning, approximately a quarter of a block from the school building. During our last meeting, approximately at 8:30 to 8:40, when we were dropping her off, she weighed around 50 kilograms, was about 110 to 112 centimeters tall. It's worth noting a distinctive feature, a noticeable mole near her nose that immediately catches the eye, the man told the investigators. Police began forming a chronological sequence of the girl's last known movements. It turned out that Stefan rarely drove Maddie to school, contrary to his initial claims. Usually, this was done by her mother or grandparents. The biological father maintained minimal contact, practically not participating in her upbringing. Our relationship is extremely close. I am the person she comes to when she conflicts with her mother, seeking support and understanding. For her, our home is a space of absolute love, Stefan emotionally emphasized. According to him, the girl preferred to be dropped off at a certain distance from the educational institution because she considered his silver 2010 Lincoln not particularly presentable. That morning, the man provided a detailed version of events. They woke up around 7 or 7:15, planning to visit McDonald's. Leaving around 7:30, they noticed that Maddie had dozed off in the car. When he asked about her well-being, the girl refused the initial plans to visit the restaurant. I dropped her off between 8:20 and 8:40 on the road near the bridge, close to residential complexes. I noticed her rummaging in her backpack, preparing to meet with friends. Making sure everything was fine with her, I wished her a good day, said, "I love you." She responded in kind. Driving away, I constantly checked the mirror to ensure she was moving in the right direction, Stefan detailed. Jane Verstosa informed law enforcement that she saw Maddie at 2300 hours the night before, when her daughter and Stefan went to sleep in the same room. In 2 independent conversations, she noted that the family often sleeps together. Due to a new work schedule, she decided to sleep separately to rest better. When investigators asked about the practice of leaving her daughter and boyfriend alone, Jane provided conflicting responses. In one instance, she claimed such situations were rare, in another, that it was a common practice in their family. Jane admitted that she initially regarded Stefan with marked wariness, especially concerning his interaction with Medi. However, over time, her concerns gradually dissipated. According to her, during 7 years of living together intermittently, Stefan and Madeline had formed an extremely close, almost parent-child relationship. Stefan's explanation of the circumstances of that fateful morning became a critical element of the investigation. The 38-year-old man promptly guided law enforcement to the location near the church where, according to his claims, he dropped off the girl so she could complete the rest of the journey on foot. Somewhere here, near these residential complexes. Do you see the power lines over there, on the opposite side? Perhaps it's a bit further, at the next turn. Somewhere in this area we were driving, and she said, "It's good here," Stefan said uncertainly, constantly changing the details of his story. Initially, his account seemed plausible. A surveillance camera was installed on the territory of Peace Church, located at the intersection of Town Loop Boulevard and Hunter Park Lane, exactly at the point Stefan mentioned. Police carefully examined the video recording. It captured a figure resembling a teenager entering the church parking lot around 8:40 a.m. and sitting on the ground. 9 minutes later, the figure rises and moves in the direction of the school. However, due to the low image quality, it was impossible to definitively confirm that this was Madeline. Even the clothing was not clear enough to confirm the description provided by Stefan. Additional complications arose from the fact that the vehicle that dropped off the indistinct figure was a dark sedan, not Stefan's silver Lincoln. Traffic cameras had captured the man's car near the school that morning, but not in the location he described. Moreover, the car unexpectedly changed its trajectory and began moving in the opposite direction. If everything is happening in the northern direction, why was your car moving south at 8:10? Cameras captured it at the intersection towards Kissimmee, the investigator clarified. Stefan tried to justify himself, "Sorry, I forgot the home remote. I had to return through the front gate, use the parking pass. I'm not too precise about time in the morning, so inaccuracies in my testimony are possible." The Orange County Sheriff initiated a large-scale search operation. Over 10 emergency service employees combed pedestrian paths and hard-to-reach areas around the school territory. Search groups used complex logistics, service dogs tracked trails, and for difficult-to-access areas, they involved quad bikes and a mounted squad. Investigators managed to access Maddie's mobile phone. The records captured her reflections before turning 14. On February 22, she dreamed of living in the forest, which seemed somewhat unusual for her age. Simultaneously, Jane and Stefan actively cooperated with local media, spreading information about the disappearance. "My boyfriend drove her to school and left." The video shows that she spent a few minutes in the church parking lot, then got up and seemingly headed towards the educational institution, but never arrived. This happened around 9 in the morning, and since then, there have been no traces of her. The school is quite nearby. I don't understand the reason for her disappearance. Perhaps something happened during the journey, or she was forcibly taken, as she never arrived. I carefully checked her messages, finding nothing unusual. Even reviewing deleted conversations provided no clues. There are no traces of communication with anyone external. Therefore, it seemed she might have been kidnapped. This is absolutely contrary to her usual behavior, to suddenly disappear without explaining where she's going or with whom. Currently, I am completely bewildered, trying to reach out to media channels to draw attention and get the necessary help, as I am in a critical emotional state. Right now, I am in a terrible psychological state, consumed by deep fear for her fate. My sincerest wish is to ensure her safety and return home. I am ready to accept any circumstances, if only she would be nearby. My sole purpose is for her to return, regardless of possible circumstances. I simply want her to be here, next to me. Stefan detailed his testimony for law enforcement. "You look extremely emotional, please tell us more in detail," they addressed him. "I dropped her off, and everything looked absolutely ordinary that morning, Stefan responded. Tell us about your last conversation in the car. Nothing special happened. For most of the journey, she was sleeping. When she was leaving for school, I wished her a good day and told her I loved her. She responded, I love you too. Aren't you ashamed of what happened? It's hard not to feel internal guilt. I dropped her off too early and could have stayed a little longer. She looked completely normal, heading to school as she did every day. So I continued my usual business. It's extremely difficult not to blame myself for what occurred. Law enforcement meticulously tracked Stefan's movements in the county using video surveillance and security camera recordings. They established that his route from the school at 8 o'clock in the morning contained several suspicious moments. Video footage near trash containers captured Stefan disposing of items at 7:30 in the morning, shortly after, by his account, dropping off his daughter at the educational institution. He then drove to an electronic cigarette store that had not yet opened for business. Stefan returned to the residential complex and then went back to the store. Later, he directed his car to the game store, House Rules, but, like in other planned locations that day, he did not actually appear at these places. This explains why his vehicle's registration occurred in different Orange and Eula counties, but never captured by cameras near food or retail establishments. Between 12 and 2 in the afternoon, the 38-year-old Stefan was changing a flat tire. According to his explanations, the stop occurred somewhere near Highway 6 to 1092 in a sparsely populated area with minimal traffic. He could not precisely localize the stopping point. Cameras recorded his movements in this area but were unable to reconstruct his full route. A court warrant was obtained to conduct a search of Stefan's house and car. During the procedural actions, law enforcement requested access to his mobile phone. I am now seizing your phone. After completing investigative actions, it will be returned to you. Do you have any questions? I apologize, how long will it take to seize the phone? The woman asked with apprehension. I'm expecting an important work call from my supervisor. My father uses this device to maintain communication with me and get current news. They might try to contact Jane. Stefan showed some reluctance to hand over access to his mobile device, claiming he had accidentally performed a factory reset. However, expert investigations found that on the day of Madeline's disappearance, he performed the reset procedure multiple times. Detectives additionally traced the garbage route from the residential complex's container to its final disposal location. Forensic experts from the Orange County Sheriff's Office discovered a damaged tire that caused a rear passenger tire blowout in Stefan's car. Directly next to the broken tire, investigators found a white polyethylene bag that, according to Stefan's testimony, he had thrown in the container around 7:30 in the morning before leaving for school. The garbage bag contained a black backpack with a purple Hawaiian ornament and one white sneaker. The corresponding footwear was subsequently found in one of the bedrooms. Forensic experts also found a computer in the backpack belonging to Orange County Public School, with Madeline's name noted on it. A law enforcement representative addressed the public. Thank you for gathering. We have important information about this case that we wish to share with our community. I would like to tell you that we found Madeline, but, unfortunately, this did not happen. The evening before, detectives met with the girl's mother and delivered the horrific news. Despite the child not being directly found, the investigation has solid grounds to believe her deceased. Therefore, further efforts will be directed at establishing the circumstances of the crime. Police established a critically important fact: Madeline was not dropped off on the morning of February 26 near the educational institution. Instead, the investigation's version suggests she was already in a critical condition at that moment. After disposing of the white garbage bag around 7:30 in the morning, Stefan returned to his vehicle. The surveillance camera recording at that moment was not released, so the decision to keep details secret seems entirely logical. Police reports document an extremely telling detail: a girl in a green hoodie was on the front passenger seat of the Lincoln, her head tilted to the left shoulder. One of the reports describes her position as unnatural for a person in a seated position. Around 8:20 in the morning, Stefan exited through the gate complex, briefly communicating with the duty guard. An hour after transporting the passenger, he drove into the Uholei Day-In parking lot. The video shows the driver exiting the car and carrying something resembling a motionless body from the front passenger seat, after which he immediately leaves the territory. Stefan's vehicle was recorded on the Old Oak Road. Later that same day, he stopped to replace the damaged tire, and at 4:40 returned to the residential complex, where he threw the used tires into the garbage container. During the same period, Jada's parents were at the Hunters Creek Educational Institution, in a state of deep concern in attempting to locate their daughter. Law enforcement had detained Stefan Stearns, though not directly on suspicion of murder. While the murder hypothesis was within the investigators' focus, there were other indisputable pieces of evidence that demanded immediate procedural intervention. The detective unit established a correlation between the suspect's personal phone and his Google Drive account. During a meticulous examination of his digital space, they discovered an extremely alarming content of an explicitly sexual nature, accumulated over 2 calendar years, 2022 and 2023. The digital array contained over 1,700 media files, among which images of the underage Milena predominated. Stefan's characteristic physical features were clearly present in a significant portion of the materials, which made any doubts about his involvement impossible. After an extremely thorough inventory of Stefan's digital content, he was officially charged with 60 criminal episodes, covering a spectrum of serious crimes related to sexual violence and unlawful actions against minors. The file metadata, which contained precise timestamps for each image and video, unequivocally demonstrated that a significant number of accusations concerned a child who had not yet reached 12 years of age. The crimes were so horrific and repulsive that even recent legislative transformations in Florida anticipated serious consequences. If the timestamps on the files had differed by only a few months, Stefan could have faced the highest punishment, the death penalty, if found guilty of the committed acts. The legislative act providing for such a possibility was signed by the Florida government at the end of December 2023. At the current moment, 60 filed charges could lead to at least life imprisonment. Such would be the case if the defendant were found guilty of all or at least most of the incriminated episodes. On Friday, March 1, 2024, law enforcement received operational information about Stefan Stearns' whereabouts. The man was spotted while changing a punctured tire on a section of Highway 3 in the settlement of St. Cloud. A random witness recorded his presence near the last surveillance camera that registered his movements on February 26, approximately 4:30 in the evening. Sheriff's Office representatives established contact with the landowner located behind closed gates opposite the presumed stopping point of Stearns. Upon opening the gates, the group of investigators immediately directed their gaze to the left, where a dense line of tall bamboo plantations stretched. At this stage of the operational work, the captain noticed blue jeans located a few feet from the bamboo tree line. Directly beneath the vegetation, what most likely appeared to be a human body was discovered. The upper part was covered with a green sweatshirt, and blue jeans were visible below. The body of a young girl was partially concealed by pieces of hay and dry grass. We purposefully directed our operational groups to the specified area and discovered a body that, by external signs, may be the body of the missing person. The clothing on the body maximally matches what the victim was last seen wearing. However, we refrain from categorical statements until official confirmation by forensic experts, law enforcement representatives commented. Subsequently, it was officially confirmed that the girl found in the bamboo grove was Milena. Considering the presumed nature of the crime related to domestic violence and the victim's minor age, the cause of death was not officially disclosed. Local information sources, based on conversations with forensic laboratory experts, reported the official conclusion regarding Milena's cause of death: strangulation. Numerous assumptions emerged around the circumstances of the case concerning how much Jennifer knew about the events occurring in the house. The inconsistency of her statements raised additional questions and diminished the level of trust. However, it should be acknowledged that a certain confusion seems entirely natural, considering the extreme psycho-emotional stress of losing a child. One of the official law enforcement representatives shared details of Jen's testimony. She claimed she last saw her daughter in the morning when she was preparing for the educational institution, approximately at 8 o'clock. This explained her confidence in knowing what clothing her daughter was wearing that day. However, her description did not correlate with the actual attire Medi was wearing when found among the bamboo plantations. In subsequent testimony, Jen slightly altered her previous narrative. Now she asserts that she possibly only heard her daughter that tragic morning but did not see her. According to her, she woke up around 7 or 8 o'clock and heard Stefan walking the dog. However, she did not hear Medi's presence in the house. Around 9:30, Jen went to a pre-planned meeting. At that moment, Stefan had not yet returned after dropping their daughter off at school. Official law enforcement representatives confirmed that Jen is not a suspect in the case. Detective Morris, who led the investigation after discovering compromising materials in Stefan's cloud account, personally encountered Jen during questioning. In his service note, he mentioned that the woman consistently denied the possibility of identifying individuals in the photographs, despite the obviousness of the images. It seemed she was in a state of deep denial. Moreover, in his official report dated February 27, 3 days before Melina's body was discovered, Detective Morris noted that throughout the interview, the mother spoke about her daughter exclusively in the past tense, which further emphasized her emotional state. Stefan Stearns was officially charged with first-degree murder concerning Melina Sue. During subsequent court proceedings, he demonstratively refused to appear at hearings, expressing dissatisfaction with the conditions of his detention in the county jail. The man complained about the temperature regime of his cell, which he claimed was 1 or 2 degrees below the acceptable norm. "How can one sleep on a bare metal bed? The first night I was forced to sleep on the concrete floor, wrapped only in toilet paper," he said, pleading with the administration to provide at least a blanket or mattress during the first days of his imprisonment. Representatives of the state of Florida publicly announced their intention to seek the highest punishment, the death penalty. Legal experts suggested that if Stefan insisted on a trial, he would do so exclusively to avoid execution. The collected materials left no realistic chances for acquittal. In Florida, the procedure for imposing the death penalty was recently changed. Now, for its approval, it is sufficient for 8 out of 12 jurors to vote in its favor. Melina was deeply mourned by her relatives and close ones. Her school friends, with tears in their eyes, told law enforcement about memories associated with Medi and the unbearable pain of her loss. The local community, which had previously prayed for the girl's safe return, tragically transitioned to organizing a memorial service on the same night her body was found. It breaks the heart, as the first thought becomes the image of one's own child. I am certain that every parent thinks exactly this in such a tragic moment. Our heart aches with the awareness of how horrific reality can be. Children must be absolutely safe, but, unfortunately, in this case, the girl found herself in mortal danger, commented one of the local residents. Can illegal actions be justified to escape unbearable suffering? This question has always sparked heated discussions and reflections. And despite the difficulty of providing an unequivocal answer, human nature drives individuals to actions that later become the subject of deep analysis and social debates. Today, we will speak about a unique story that unfolded in one of the most remote corners of Australia. A small settlement called Lockhart in New South Wales, located between 2 powerful metropolises, Sydney and Melbourne, became the epicenter of events that would forever change the life of one family. It was a typical rural town with a population of slightly over 800 inhabitants, where everyone knew each other, where traditional values and a leisurely rhythm of life prevailed. It was here, among fertile fields and cozy farms, that the Hunt family resided. The family unit consisted of 5 members, a father, a mother, and 3 children. The head of the family, Geoff Hunt, was 44 years old, a sturdy man with the hard-working hands of a farmer and intelligent eyes. His wife Kim, 3 years younger, was his complete opposite and simultaneously his perfect complement. Their love story began during their student years when both were full of energy, ambition, and belief in the future. Geoff and Kim's acquaintance quickly grew into a strong relationship. They married, dreaming of a large, friendly family where mutual respect and support would reign. Even years later, the couple remained extraordinarily active, intellectually developed, and purposeful. In the local community, they were respected not only for their professional achievements but also for their humanity, sociability, and community involvement. Kim had cherished a dream of helping people since childhood, which is why she purposefully chose medical education. After graduating from university, she found work as a nurse in the intensive care unit. Each workday for her was an opportunity to save someone's life, to realize her most cherished dream. In her free time, she loved horseback riding and devoted much attention to her home garden, her personal corner of comfort and tranquility. Geoff dedicated himself to the family's agricultural business, growing rapeseed. Together with his brother Alan, he continued his parents' work, carefully cultivating the land parcels that had been passed down to them. The man understood that agriculture was not just a job, but a way of life, a tradition that needed to be preserved and developed. The family had once gone through a challenging domestic period, but they managed to overcome all challenges, once again revealing the best qualities in each other. Their children, 3 of the most precious beings whom the parents unconditionally loved and supported, significantly contributed to this. At the moment of this narrative, the children were at different ages. The eldest, Fletcher, was 10 years old, the middle child was 8, and the youngest, Phoebe, was 6 years old. The Hunt family was a true example for the local community, especially due to their active volunteer work and constant readiness to help and support anyone in need. Despite their successful professional activities, Kim's medical work and Geoff's farming, the Hunt family encountered an extraordinarily challenging life trial in 2012. Tragic events began on an ordinary day when Kim went on a trip with her younger daughter Phoebe. The car accident that occurred that day would forever change the family's life. As a result of the crash, the vehicle rolled over twice, and the consequences were horrific. Miraculously saved, 6-year-old Phoebe suffered only minor injuries, but her mother's condition caused the most serious concern. Doctors literally fought for Kim's life, noting minimal chances of survival. The prolonged medicinal coma became a test for the entire family. Medical personnel were extremely pessimistic, practically leaving no hope for recovery. Moreover, specialists considered Kim exclusively as a potential organ donor, which definitively undermined any hopes for her full restoration. Geoff Hunt categorically rejected such a verdict. The man demonstrated incredible endurance and love, being by his wife's side daily. He believed in a miracle and made maximum efforts for her rehabilitation. In fact, Kim had to relearn the simplest life skills, how to walk, speak, and perform basic household actions. The local community supported the head of the family. Geoff single-handedly maintained the household, raised 3 children, and cared for his wife. Relatives tried to help, but it was insufficient. Eventually, the man hired a professional caregiver for Kim and a household assistant, which significantly eased the family's situation. Medical specialists and close ones unanimously recognized the cardinal changes in Kim's personality. After the accident, the woman tired quickly, had significant problems with self-control and emotional stability. Sudden mood swings were frequent, most often manifesting through aggression toward Geoff. The man showed incredible patience, understanding the complexity of the rehabilitation process. Over time, positive dynamics became noticeable. Kim gradually restored her ability to move and engage in household chores. The woman sharply rejected the role of a dependent, striving for independence and self-sufficiency. Her former professional nature as a nurse fought against her current condition. Returning to professional activities at that moment seemed absolutely unrealistic. Her physical and psychological recovery was too complicated. Kim's rehabilitation turned into a daily feat. The woman moved through the house with extraordinary difficulty, applying maximum effort to maintain the family household and care for 3 children. Every movement, every task was incredibly challenging. For a person who had suffered devastating trauma to the brain and spinal cord, daily household activities became a true triumph of will and endurance. Problems began to accumulate in all areas of the family's life, especially affecting the couple's relationship. Geoff found himself in an extremely difficult situation. In addition to constant care for his wife and children, the man was forced to continue working on the farm. The family's financial situation was becoming critical. Expenses for treatment, medications, and additional care were exhausting the family budget, forcing them to literally fight for survival every day. The rehabilitation period became an incredibly harsh test for Geoff. Nervous breakdowns and constant psychological tension affected the man. The harvest season added extra stress. Despite all the difficulties, the farm continued to function, bringing sufficient income for the family's comfortable existence. Kim's psychological state caused serious concern. The woman repeatedly confided to medical professionals about an unbearable desire for death, believing that her family would be better off without her. These alarming moods forced Geoff to take urgent measures. All firearms were removed from the farm to prevent a potential tragedy. However, weapons were necessary for agricultural needs and self-defense. Therefore, they were soon returned but carefully hidden from Kim. Forced leave and the inability to work in her profession were extremely difficult for the woman's psychological state. The only true light and comfort for her remained her children, 3 of the most precious beings for whom she fought for life every day. The year 2013 became a turning point in the recovery process. Kim finally managed to return to professional activities, albeit in a significantly limited format. Initially, she worked only 8 hours a week, primarily engaged in training young medical staff and trainees. Frequent memory lapses and quick fatigue did not allow her to return to her previous work rhythm. Despite this, the woman again joined volunteer activities, demonstrating an incredible spirit and desire to be useful. Kim's professional mission took on special significance, as it directly touched upon her personal life experience. Her activities were focused on educational work regarding road safety and the consequences of traumatic brain injuries. Through her own painful experience, she not only sought support among those around her but also became a source of support for other victims. By August 2014, the Hunt family was gradually returning to their usual rhythm of life. Kim's sister, Jenny, visited her to congratulate her younger daughter on her 6th birthday. The atmosphere of the celebration resembled pre-catastrophe times, which brought genuine joy to Jenny. It seemed that all difficulties were left behind, and life was entering a calm course. She could not yet foresee that this would be her last meeting with her sister. On September 8, 2014, a typical day for the family began. Kim took the children to the school bus stop and then returned home. The household helper, Lauren, was also present in the Hunt household that day. The school day for the children passed without any special events. Around 2:30, the children returned home with their mother. The day before, Father's Day was celebrated, so Geoff planned to spend time with his children. Kim, considering the consequences of her previous injuries, needed daytime rest and took a short nap. The day was developing quite smoothly, with a positive atmosphere, until a minor conflict arose with the older son over a football match. Geoff, who was refereeing children's sports competitions, believed that 10-year-old Fletcher had violated the rules of the game. The mother tried to calm down her disappointed son. After this incident, Geoff left his family at home and went to his parents' farm. He planned to visit them on the holiday but came alone. According to him, Lauren, the children, and Kim were supposed to remain at the farm to complete certain tasks. Geoff's parents immediately noticed a change in their son's emotional state. He looked lost, did not demonstrate his usual cheerfulness, and it was difficult to maintain a normal conversation. For a man who usually stood out for his sociability and positive mood, such behavior was uncharacteristic. They tried to find out the reason for his depression, but Geoff avoided a frank conversation and soon returned home. According to the testimony of the household helper Lauren, a minor conflict occurred that day between Geoff and Kim. Despite not seeming serious, the man was upset and decided to play golf, leaving his wife with the children. Upon returning home, the head of the family instructed the children to take a shower, approximately at 7 p.m. Before a light evening meal, they watched a family TV show. Apparently, internal family tensions did not subside. During a conversation with the helper, Kim expressed dissatisfaction with her husband, calling him lazy. The reasons for her irritation were varied. Geoff had allowed the children to consume unhealthy food and watch television contrary to established family rules. Moreover, she shared deeper concerns with Lauren. According to her, one of Geoff's brothers had groundlessly used family fund money to purchase a house and a car. Additionally, her husband was paying significant sums to his family from the same fund, which caused her serious concern. Geoff was not present during this conversation and did not hear it, so the conflict did not escalate. The household maintained an outwardly calm atmosphere. Around 7:30 in the evening, the housekeeper Lauren was preparing to go home. The children warmly said goodbye to her, and Geoff cheerfully called out, "Goodbye, thank you, see you tomorrow." But these words were not destined to come true. Later, in her police statement, Lauren would recount that there was a certain tension in the family, but she could not have imagined the horror that would unfold after her departure. Returning to the farm that day, as usual, she saw Kim lying on the lawn 3 meters from the house, still wearing her nightgown. At first, Lauren thought the mistress had fallen and needed help. Running closer, she noticed that Kim was motionless, and her face was hidden under 2 jackets. Throwing off the outer clothing, Lauren realized the worst: it was already impossible to help Kim. The woman was dead, from a gunshot wound to the head. Her body was covered in blood, and her skin had already cooled. The housekeeper was terrified to her core and immediately called emergency services. Medics, arriving at the scene, confirmed the fatal outcome. Kim had been fatally wounded almost point-blank, the shot hitting just above her right eye, eliminating any chances of rescue. In the corridor, they immediately found a cartridge shell on the floor. All evidence indicated that the murder had occurred right there, as Kim would not have been physically capable of reaching the lawn after the shot. After the initial examination, the medics left the premises, fearing the possible presence of a perpetrator. Despite the potential danger, Lauren, together with the medics, waited for the police to arrive. The household helper was in a state of anxiety, recognizing the need to meet the children from school, especially considering that Geoff had not yet been found. Lauren felt that even more horrifying news awaited her. When the police arrived and examined the premises, they shared a shocking fact: the children had not attended Catholic School of St. Joseph that day, a school with only 74 students. The absence of all 3 children immediately caught the officials' attention. In the rooms of the younger children, Fletcher and Phoebe, they discovered bodies. They had most likely been sleeping in different rooms during the tragic events. 8-year-old May had managed to wake up. Each child had a single gunshot wound to the head. May's eyes were wide open. On the kitchen table, they found a note on a napkin made by the eldest daughter Phoebe as a gift. The text was written in an adult's handwriting: "I'm sorry, this is all my fault, completely my fault." The origin of the note remained a mystery. It was speculated that Geoff, the family's husband, might have written it. At that moment, his whereabouts were unknown. He was not making contact. Versions varied, whether the man had fled after the murder or had become a victim of unknown criminals who killed his family. The only way to clarify the circumstances of the murder was to find 40-year-old Geoff. An extensive search was immediately announced, and active search measures began. The crime scene investigation did not reveal any signs of third-party intervention, no fingerprints, genetic traces, and no signs of forced entry into the house. Information about the horrific tragedy spread lightning fast among local residents. People were in shock and bewilderment, trying to comprehend the scale of what had happened. Neighbors could not believe that Geoff was capable of such terrible crimes. Many sincerely thought that the man might have become a victim of unknown attackers. Sympathy and deep concern prevailed in the community. Local residents demanded an immediate investigation, eager to establish the truth as quickly as possible and ensure the community's safety. Law enforcement had been investigating the perimeter of the agricultural land for an extended period. The next day, they discovered fresh automotive tracks that led investigators to a small water reservoir located several hundred meters from the Hunt family's property. Divers, examining the water body, found Geoff Hunt's body at a depth of 1.5 meters, along with a traumatic pistol. The man had died from a gunshot wound to the upper part of his skull, and it was absolutely evident that the tragic shot was fired by himself. The traumatic pistol was placed directly into his oral cavity. The forensic examination established that the body had been in the water for approximately 30 hours. Criminalists conducted a thorough comparison of Geoff's handwriting with previously written greeting cards to his wife and the suicide note found on the dining table. The expert analysis conclusively showed a 100% match, which unequivocally pointed to Geoff's involvement in the tragic events. A comprehensive reconstruction of the sequence of tragedy proved practically impossible due to the complete absence of witnesses. However, the investigation managed to establish the horrifying circumstances. The family head, Geoff, cold-bloodedly deprived 3 of his sleeping children of life, after which he shot his wife, who was attempting to flee the house. Apparently, later the man felt deep remorse and awareness of his actions. He left the crime scene, got into his old automobile, and drove along a dirt road. After traveling several hundred meters, he turned into a wheat field and proceeded towards the water reservoir, where his abandoned car was ultimately found. The motive for the crime remained absolutely incomprehensible to the local community. Many residents of Kalookhard City respected Geoff Hunt so deeply that they categorically refused to accept the obvious evidence of his involvement in the crime. Geoff was a well-known figure in the city, a diligent farmer, a judge at children's football competitions, an active volunteer, and a participant in socially significant community initiatives. This multifaceted activity evoked an extremely complex and ambiguous reaction from local residents. Among the population, alternative versions even emerged about a possible involvement of his wife Keane. Some neighbors who previously were not particularly well disposed towards her suggested that she might have been the initiator of the tragedy. The version was based on rumors about her alleged tendency towards depressive states and a desire to leave this world. However, the investigation unequivocally proved the groundlessness of this version. Geoff was found with a traumatic pistol on his person, whereas Keane did not have one. Moreover, the location of the cartridge and its distance from the presumed trajectory of movement made impossible the version about her involvement in the murder. Ultimately, the expertise conclusively proved, a deliberate murder was committed directly by Geoff Hunt. The forensic examination unequivocally confirmed the impossibility of Kim's involvement in the murder. Her physical condition precluded performing such actions. The right side of her body had significant functional limitations that made weapon manipulation impossible. Not a single expert expressed doubt about the perpetrator of the crime. It was Geoff Hunt. Even after law enforcement presented irrefutable evidence of Geoff's involvement in murdering his own family, protective sentiments continued to emerge in the local community. The man had created such an impeccable public image that he began to be perceived almost like a martyr. An objective assessment of events left no smallest space for justification. The fact that Geoff deprived 3 minors and his wife, who had suffered a severe automobile trauma, of life made any sympathy impossible. Despite this, the local community demonstrated incredible solidarity, funds were collected, and a funeral was organized for the entire family with maximum honors. For investigators, it was extremely important to conduct the most detailed investigation possible. The mass murder could not be hushed up or ignored, it needed to be comprehensively analyzed to prevent similar tragic incidents in the future. Detectives attempted to find a logical explanation for the crime's motive. On that fatal day, Geoff was in a state of emotional tension due to a conflict with his son and a subsequent argument with his wife. However, such behavior was atypical for him. In the presence of the housekeeper, the family atmosphere usually remained controlled. Geoff and Kim traditionally demonstrated an ability to constructively resolve any contradictions. They maintained calm and balance, and nothing indicated a potential tragedy. The housekeeper testified that she had never previously seen Geoff aggressive. He did not raise his voice, did not demonstrate physical aggression towards his wife or children, and even less showed a tendency to use weapons. In contrast to her husband, Kim could be emotionally unstable. During periods when she forgot to take antidepressants, there were instances of her sharp emotional outbursts directed at family members. The version about Geoff's prolonged deep depression seemed unlikely. It would have been extremely difficult to conceal such a psycho-emotional state from his closest circle, relatives who maintained constant contact, and the housekeeper who was in the house daily. None of them noticed any harbingers of the future tragedy. Yes, Geoff had certain problems in the financial sphere, but they were not critical in nature. He was entirely capable of continuing to support his family and actively seek ways to resolve difficulties. His personal profile indicated an extraordinarily high level of responsibility, acquired through years of conscientious work and social activity. Reconstructing the sequence of events literally piece by piece, investigators concluded that the tragedy did not show signs of a premeditated murder, but rather resembled a sudden emotional outburst. The man demonstrated usual behavior and, up to the moment of his wife's departure, had specific plans for the near future, acting like a responsible father and caring family man. On the eve of the tragic events, Geoff prepared school lunches for the children and arranged a tennis match with a friend for the weekend. Neither of the spouses kept personal notes or diaries where hidden conflicts or preconditions for violence might have been contained. Instead, Aiken's plans had clearly defined future events, which indirectly testified to their intentions to continue living together, working, and developing. It turned out that Geoff regularly consulted a psychotherapist, confessing that he feared loneliness most of all. A few weeks before the fatal events, his wife Kim shared with a relative her dissatisfaction with the family's financial state, which periodically created tension. Moreover, she openly stated her cooling feelings towards her husband and even considered the possibility of divorce. It is assumed that this might have provoked Geoff's critical emotional state. Several psychological experts were immediately involved in the investigation for an in-depth analysis of the situation. After studying the case materials and communicating with the couple's surroundings, specialists discovered pronounced signs of depression in Geoff Hunt, dejection, internal anxiety, and emotional exhaustion. On the eve of the tragedy, the man behaved extremely silently, obviously hiding something. Close ones noticed his psychological discomfort and tried to ascertain the reasons. The peculiarity of male psychology lies in the fact that men rarely speak openly about internal problems, perceiving a request for help as a demonstration of weakness. Prolonged internal struggle with emotional experiences forced Geoff to continue leading his usual lifestyle without demonstrating the accumulated psychological tension externally. He meticulously concealed his internal imbalance, which only intensified his psycho-emotional state. Psychological experts suggest that the man's primary motive could have been a desire to leave life due to deep depression and the loss of any hope for positive changes. The method of using a firearm, inflicting a single fatal wound, may also indicate an attempt to minimize the physical suffering of family members. The housekeeper expressed understanding that Geoff was under colossal psychological pressure in various life dimensions, particularly due to coexisting with his wife Kim after her severe trauma, which radically changed her personality. Apparently, the man had simply exhausted all his internal resistance reserves. Kim's relatives share a similar opinion. The accident so radically complicated their family life that Geoff obviously considered the tragic scenario as the only possible way out. His wife no longer resembled the woman he had married, and ultimately, the man could not withstand the psychological burden. Psychological experts concluded that Geoff's original intent did not include physically destroying his relatives. Most likely, he planned only to deprive himself of life due to accumulated internal problems, anxieties, and potential divorce prospects. However, in a critical moment, he made a radical decision to completely eliminate the family. He evidently interpreted his act as a kind of salvation. Being the sole breadwinner of the family, Geoff was aware that his suicide would condemn his loved ones to a miserable existence, so he decided to radically prevent such an adverse development of events. From his distorted psychological perspective, the act looked almost merciful. The head of the family quickly and minimally painfully deprived each family member of life with a single shot to the head, as he did not want them to suffer prolonged pain. In psychiatric practice, such behavior is classified as an ultra-altruistic or pseudo-altruistic model. In any case, the Hunt family tragedy will forever remain in criminalistic annals as one of the most horrific examples of family violence. According to comprehensive scientific research, the absolute majority of family annihilators are men. According to Professor Wilson, a world-renowned researcher of family crimes, the proportion of men in such crimes reaches approximately 95%. The most obvious common characteristic is precisely the male nature of such criminal acts. After analyzing hundreds of cases of family destruction, researchers refute common myths and destroy stereotypes about criminals. It turns out that murderers are not necessarily disappointed failures with a long history of defeats. A significant portion of such individuals have achieved substantial professional success. Statistics show that 71% were employed in various professional spheres, from surgery and marketing to postal service, law enforcement, and freight transportation. After studying the motivational models of male annihilators, Wilson and his research group identified 4 typological groups. However, the common denominator for all without exception cases was a specific interpretation of male masculinity, established ideas about gender roles, and the place of a man in the family structure. In each of the considered cases, ideas about masculinity and strength formed the psychological basis for crimes. The family role of a man occupied a central place in their coordinate system, and murder appeared to be the last desperate attempt to prove and realize their own male identity. Professor Wilson's research identified 4 specific psychological profiles of family annihilators. The first type, a self-confident destructor who completely transfers responsibility for the crime to the victim. For him, the central aspect is the status of a punisher who supposedly carries out an act of restoring justice. The second type, a disappointed destroyer who is convinced that his family betrayed his expectations or undermined his worldview. In his consciousness, the family appears as a source of deep personal collapse. The third type, an anomic destroyer who perceives the family structure as a demonstration platform for his economic achievements. He falls into a rage when he realizes that the family no longer functions as a status symbol of his success. The fourth type, a paranoid aggressor who sees an external threat to the family system, considering himself the only possible protector. Professor Wilson emphasized that all these types are united by a hyperbolized perception of male roles and parental responsibilities. The scientist discovered an interesting pattern. Self-confident killers often choose symbolic dates to realize their criminal intentions, for example, Father's Day. In Geoff Hunt's specific case, this pattern is particularly pronounced. The man destroyed his family 2 days after the professional holiday for parents. Moreover, suicide notes were left on a gift given by one of his children for this family holiday. Domestic violence specialists recorded a quite revealing social reaction. Some communities showed such militant readiness to defend men that they began to spread versions about the alleged involvement of Geoff's wife Kim in the children's murder. As if Geoff acted as a kind of white knight who avenged his family. However, law enforcement categorically rejected such assumptions. There are no objective evidence to confirm such a version. Eloquent is Geoff Hunt's own handwritten letter, which clearly states, "Forgive me, this is completely my fault, and we must not forget about this." The story of the disappearance of Justice Marie Garrett shook the small town of Sorrento, Florida, becoming one of the most complex cases in local law enforcement history. The 16-year-old girl vanished under mysterious circumstances, forcing investigators to plunge into a deep and disturbing investigative process. Friday, April 13, 2018, became a day of irreparable tragedy for the Garrett family. That morning, everything was slightly off-kilter. Justis woke up later than her usual schedule, risking missing the school bus. Her mother, 37-year-old Danielle, was busy getting her younger 5-year-old daughter ready for daycare and couldn't help her older daughter make it to the educational institution on time. Initially, the family didn't feel serious concern. Justis often stayed after classes with friends, and such situations didn't raise particular alarm. Her parents were confident that their daughter might be staying overnight at a friend's place, so they calmly went to bed. However, the situation dramatically changed in the morning. Her bed was empty, and she wasn't responding to phone calls. Danielle immediately contacted law enforcement with a missing person report. Detectives started working immediately, without waiting for the traditional waiting period. They began exploring possible scenarios of her disappearance, understanding that teenage runaway cases were not uncommon. The family had recently moved to the small town of Sorrento, with a population of less than 1,000 residents. The mild climate and picturesque nature contrasted sharply with the family's internal state. Changing schools mid-year could create psychological challenges for Justis, which is typical for teenagers. Her mother insisted that her daughter was exceptionally responsible and mature for her age. She helped around the house, took care of her younger sister, and was unlikely to simply disappear without warning. Her behavior in recent months showed certain changes, which seemed natural for teenagers during periods of complex life transformations. Law enforcement officers immersed themselves in the case details, fully aware of the situation's gravity. Every scenario was checked with maximum thoroughness, from a possible runaway to more alarming possibilities. The profession of investigators demanded composure and attention to every detail, as the fate of a young girl was at stake. Justis's parents waited for any information, their internal state balancing between hope and despair. The small town of Sorrento held its breath, awaiting the results of an investigation that could change their lives forever. Theories multiplied, details became tangled, but the main question remained unchanged: what happened to Justis Marie Garrett on that fateful April day? The uniqueness of Justis Marie Garrett's personality was once again confirmed by the testimonies of her close ones and acquaintances. Her character was distinguished by exceptional sincerity and openness in communication with her relatives. The girl had no reasons for a mysterious disappearance, as she was accustomed to openly discussing any problems with her mother, Danielle. Her parents were shocked by the complete absence of any explanations for her disappearance. All of Justis's personal belongings remained untouched at home, which completely ruled out the version of a voluntary escape. Danielle was resolute in her assumptions: something serious and dangerous had happened to her daughter. Police officers meticulously checked every detail. Official databases contained no compromising information about the minor, no offenses, no incidents. Justis was an exemplary student who had no problems with the law or school discipline. Immediately, various versions and rumors began to form around the disappearance. The school environment exploded with numerous unverified stories. Some claimed they saw the girl at the cemetery, while others invented romantic stories about a secret boyfriend. Most of these narratives were simply teenage fabrications aimed at drawing attention to themselves. The community of Sorrento town was in a state of emotional tension. Local residents tried to help law enforcement, but none of the versions led to concrete results. Justis's school friends were divided into two camps: some actively spread rumors, while others tried to resist false information. Investigators narrowed down the circle of suspects and potential witnesses. They meticulously interviewed the girl's closest circle: classmates, teachers, friends. An indisputable fact was established: Justis did not appear at school on that fateful day, which meant the disappearance had already occurred in the morning. Police officers understood that they were approaching the resolution of a case that might turn out to be much more complex and tragic than it initially seemed. Each piece of evidence, each testimony gradually formed a horrifying picture of possible events. The parents continued to hope for the best, not stopping their search for their daughter. Danielle was full of determination to find out the truth at any cost, regardless of any obstacles or warnings from law enforcement. The town of Sorrento froze in anticipation, with each resident subconsciously understanding that what happened to Justis would forever change the life of this small community. Analysis of video surveillance records and Justis's phone geolocation confirmed her route, leaving home at 7:25 a.m. heading towards school. However, the girl disappeared within a narrow 30-minute window while en route to the educational institution, leaving numerous questions about the circumstances of her disappearance. On April 17, 4 days after the teenager's inexplicable vanishing, a man approached law enforcement after discovering a suspicious strange odor during his morning running training near a forest path. His attentiveness and vigilance helped uncover the horrific details of the tragedy. Approaching the source of the unpleasant aroma, he immediately encountered a human body and immediately called emergency rescue services. The police officers who arrived at the scene documented a female corpse with clear signs of prolonged exposure outside human dwellings. The body showed minor damages from wild fauna and climatic conditions, but the primary tissue injuries were caused by a chemical substance similar to a powerful bleach. Experts suggested that the use of this aggressive liquid was intended to hide crime evidence and complicate victim identification. Initial body examination was complicated by its critical condition. The upper body was so damaged by chemical burns that it was difficult to determine anatomical features. However, even in this state, it was evident that death resulted from violent actions. Final identification was only possible after thorough genetic analysis. The body's location was a forested area near Delanda City, approximately 30 kilometers from Justis's hometown of Sorrento. The body's condition demonstrated a horrifying scene. The upper part was so destroyed that bone structures were visible in places, while the lower part was better preserved due to clothing. Forensic medical examination could not establish the exact cause of death due to the body's complex physical condition, though suffocation was considered the most probable version. Additional evidence pointed to violence. The girl's pants were pulled down to her ankles, her upper clothing pushed up. However, due to the aggressive chemical substance, evidence could not be conclusively proven. The body clearly showed signs of physical violence. Notably, the nose was broken in several places, indicating the attacker's brutality. Questioning the man who discovered the body brought additional crucial information for the investigation. The witness reported that the day before, on the 16th, during his running training, he noticed an unknown person near the location of the future tragic discovery. According to his description, the stranger's physique and build appeared male. The runner's appearance frightened the unknown individual, causing them to immediately disappear. The witness himself underwent thorough verification and a polygraph test, confirming his non-involvement in the crime. Police conducted a thorough investigation of Justis's route, carefully examining video surveillance records at all key sections of her presumed movement, including stops where the school bus was supposed to depart. The preliminary information from the girl's mother about her daughter's independent journey to the educational institution proved to be false. It turned out that on that tragic morning, the girl's escort to school was her stepfather Robert, who was heading to the construction site where he worked as a carpenter. The man's professional situation was complicated. He was constantly seeking stable work and getting by with temporary odd jobs. Inconsistencies in the mother's testimony forced investigators to conduct an additional, more meticulous interrogation. This time, the woman changed her previous version, confirming that Robert was indeed supposed to take Justis to the educational institution. Her explanation for the initial lie was quite unexpected. The man had temporarily suspended his driving privileges, and she was afraid of possible legal consequences for him. Such manipulations with information significantly complicated the investigation process. Detectives sent official requests to obtain video recordings from the school's automotive parking lot, where the girl was supposed to be dropped off. The presumed stop location coincided with the school bus location that Justis was supposed to use. Unexpectedly, it turned out that precisely during the period of interest to the investigation, a technical failure occurred in the video surveillance system. As a result, establishing the fact of the girl's drop-off became impossible. Dozens of interviewed school staff and students unanimously claimed that Justis did not appear at the educational institution that day. Robert, Justis's mother's partner, remained the last person who had seen the girl alive. Intensive interrogations and psychological pressure from law enforcement eventually forced the man to reveal more. On April 29, Robert provided a fundamentally new version of events. According to him, he did not take Justis to school. Instead, at the girl's request, he dropped her off in the city center, assuming she had a secret meeting, most likely with a boyfriend. The man hoped to establish relations with his stepdaughter this way and prove his loyalty to her mother Danielle. Robert claimed that he intentionally did not try to clarify the details of the meeting, as he was at the initial stage of his relationship with the girl's mother. He did not know the name or any details about the person Justis was supposed to meet. The girl assured him that she would independently get to school and return by bus. Robert was absolutely confident in the safety of the situation. The man had no opportunity to wait for Justis, as he was urgently heading to a work shift as a day laborer in Volusia County, without having a free minute for additional waiting. Law enforcement was struck by this unexpected version of events. Neither parent had any information about the mysterious stranger with whom the girl was supposedly supposed to meet. A well-grounded version emerged that Robert could be either the last person who saw Justis alive or even involved in her disappearance. Attempts to obtain additional information from the mother and stepfather proved futile. Therefore, detectives again turned to the deceased's social circle. It turned out that Justis practically had no close friends, as her peers unanimously testified. However, her friends shared an interesting detail. Recently, the girl had begun talking about an unknown boy from the internet. They had met on social networks, where he showed considerable activity and heightened attention towards her. According to her friends, Justis was dissatisfied with the stranger's excessive enthusiasm and did not plan to develop a relationship. Police carefully analyzed the girl's social media profiles, examining likes, comments, subscriptions, and correspondence. Particular attention was drawn to an account of an 18-year-old young man with a muscular appearance who had been actively communicating with Justis, trying to get acquainted and making compliments. Despite the guy's claims about living nearby, police could not identify anyone similar in the deceased's immediate environment. None of her friends recognized the depicted person. Moreover, despite active attempts to make contact, Justis consistently ignored all messages. Detectives were convinced this account contained the key to solving the crime. A thorough check of the account allowed them to obtain the user's phone number. However, the result was shocking. It turned out that the page belonged not to an 18-year-old youth, but to a middle-aged man named Robert Kern. Investigators were stunned by the coincidence of circumstances. Robert, who had previously been willing to cooperate, now completely changed his position and refused to collaborate. Law enforcement became more persistent, as the man had already been caught in false testimony, and all collected evidence led directly to him. Robert had become the primary suspect in the murder of a minor girl. Despite his denials, law enforcement arrested Robert Kern and conducted thorough psychological and criminal profiling to compare his personality with the circumstances of the brutal crime. Of course, online correspondence could not serve as irrefutable evidence of involvement in murder. At that time, Robert had practically become a family member, as he had been dating the victim's mother since the previous autumn. He constantly stayed overnight in their home, frequently contacted all family members, and there were no indications of the man's inappropriate behavior towards the underage girl. At least, outwardly, they knew nothing about such things. The girl herself remained silent and told no one about possible problems. Robert categorically denied any guilt and rejected any advances towards the minor. He explained the social media correspondence as an unsuccessful joke. He claimed that the inspiring messages with compliments were an attempt to boost Justis's self-esteem, suggesting she would be pleased to receive so much male attention. However, his version sounded utterly absurd, as Justis hadn't even made contact with the boy who constantly liked her photos and showered her with compliments. She simply ignored his presence and considered him mentally unstable in conversations with her friends. In an effort to find additional evidence, investigators decided to speak with Justis's closest friend named Rachel. The girl reported that they had an exceptionally close friendship, especially in the recent period. Justis often stayed at her home. On one occasion, Robert personally came to Rachel's place to check on Justis's status and learn about her immediate plans to return home. This visit caused significant concern for her friend, after which Justis didn't return home at all and remained to sleep at Rachel's. According to her friend, in the months leading up to the tragic events, Justis stayed with her so often that it began to look extremely suspicious. It seemed that the girl was consciously trying to avoid sleeping at home. In recent months, Robert had been staying very late at Danielle's residence. Rachel wondered, could his constant presence have prompted the victim to want to avoid her own home? According to the friend, Justis had spent almost a month directly before her death at her place. Rachel also noted striking changes in her friend's behavior. Whereas she was previously calm, now she would literally flinch at any accidental touch. Indirectly, the girl acknowledged that she was afraid of her stepfather. During the interrogation, her best friend recalled seeing Robert on the day of Justis's disappearance. According to her testimony, the man looked terrible, his gaze was so frightening that she felt genuine, animal-like fear. After this conversation, she finally understood why Justis constantly tried to spend nights at her place. However, Rachel could not clearly explain exactly what in Robert's behavior and appearance had caused such a deep sense of anxiety and suspicion. Despite initial doubts, investigators were confident they were on the right course. Detectives decided to conduct an in-depth investigation into the main suspect's biography, carefully analyzing his online communications and phone calls. The results of their investigation caused genuine shock and disgust. It turned out that Robert's criminal past was quite extensive. Starting with 2 burglaries with illegal entry in the early 2000s, the man continued to demonstrate criminal behavior. Analysis of search queries from the past month revealed extremely suspicious information. Robert was interested in capable of causing loss of consciousness, particularly chloroform. Moreover, it seemed he had managed to acquire this dangerous substance. Additional evidence pointed to long-term and purposeful preparation for the crime. The perpetrator carefully studied maps and surrounding forest areas, apparently trying to find the most secluded place to hide the crime. His search queries also included methods of destroying traces on the victim's body, including information about bleaches that could be used to process the body. Robert's mobile phone geolocation on the day of the girl's disappearance became a key piece of evidence. Contrary to his claims, the man did not stop near bus stops or schools, nor did he drop anyone off in the city. Instead, he deliberately headed to the forest where Justis's body was later discovered. In this area, his mobile phone remained stationary for almost an hour, further confirming Robert's involvement in the crime. Initially, the man claimed he was heading to work in the Volusia area, but this proved to be an outright lie. In fact, he brought his lover's daughter to a remote forest area where, according to the investigation, he raped and killed the girl, and then set about concealing the crime. The investigation managed to charge Robert with the murder of the minor Justis. He was taken into custody before the start of the trial. The exact motive for the crime was never clarified. Robert remained silent until the end of the court hearing. The prosecution suggested murder for the purpose of violence. The defendant refused to provide any testimony in his defense, consistently denying his guilt. However, the prosecution had such powerful evidence that left no doubt about the man's involvement in the crime. During the court hearing, the defendant's extensive criminal history was made public. Robert was first arrested in May 2019 in New York State for fraud. Since then, he had been in Volusia County Jail without the possibility of release. The investigation proved that as early as 1999, the man first broke the law by committing a burglary with illegal entry, for which he received 18 months in prison. 3 years later, he committed another theft, for which he served a 1-year term. All of Robert's testimonies were found to be false. He claimed to have dropped Justis off near the school early in the morning and worked as a carpenter, but both statements were categorically refuted by the investigation. When the first versions of his defense collapsed, Robert began to invent increasingly absurd explanations, apparently trying to confuse the investigators. However, his manipulations only further confirmed his involvement in the brutal crime. Investigative teams conducted a detailed analysis of the suspects and the victims' movements, synchronizing all temporal coordinates with extraordinary precision. The accused's telephone communications and electronic correspondence revealed that the crime had been meticulously pre-planned. The prosecution concluded that the young girl was doomed from the very beginning, as Robert's criminal intentions were exclusively directed towards a fatal outcome. Forensic experts discovered unique biological traces of vegetation and soil from the crime scene directly in the suspect's vehicle. Contrary to the accused's categorical statements about having no presence in the specified area, it was established that he visited this location at least twice. Moreover, after committing the brutal crime, the man returned to the crime scene once again. Mobile phone geolocation data confirmed his presence in the crime area on April 16 during a short time interval. A version was proposed that at this very moment, he arrived and processed the body with chemical substances to eliminate traces of the criminal act. It was then that a sports runner, who subsequently discovered the victim's body, noticed him. At the time of the incriminated crime, the accused was 43 years old. The prosecution insisted on the undertone of the attack, asserting that the abduction of a minor was a targeted act aimed at satisfying perverted urges and subsequent cruel violence. Robert had long exhibited an unhealthy interest in Justis, who consistently avoided unwanted attention and rarely stayed at home. He systematically attempted to realize his unlawful intentions, and when an appropriate moment arose, he achieved his goal, depriving the 16-year-old girl of her life. The victim's mother, in a state of shock, provided extremely crucial testimony against the defendant. She explained that it was Robert who prevented her from immediately contacting law enforcement after her daughter's disappearance. The man convinced her that Justis was at her friend Rachel's place, and subsequently forced her to claim that the girl had independently left for an educational institution. Initially, the woman did not comprehend the true motivation behind his manipulations, assuming he was afraid of possible consequences due to driving a vehicle without appropriate documentation. After carefully examining the case materials, the jury reached a decision within a short time frame, approximately 30 minutes. They unanimously found Robert Kern guilty of intentional first-degree murder of a minor. The sentence included life imprisonment without the possibility of early release, as well as an additional 5 years of imprisonment for consciously attempting to obstruct the investigation. Throughout the entire judicial process, the accused never admitted his guilt and showed no signs of remorse. Despite irrefutable evidence, he insisted on his innocence until the very end, accusing law enforcement agencies of unwarranted persecution and systemic arbitrariness. One of the fundamental postulates of personal safety categorically asserts, no contacts, trust, or acquaintances with strangers. This statement might seem entirely justified, however, statistical data eloquently testify to the opposite. Threats most frequently originate from well-known surroundings. Today, we present a story about one of the most brutal murderers in the United States of America, who literally destroyed an entire family. Amanda Dose was born in Muskogee, Oklahoma, USA, in 1976. Muskogee is a typical provincial American town, devoid of any notable attractions. The location is characterized by a minimal crime rate, with its demographic portrait primarily consisting of family couples with children. However, this suburb did not satisfy Amanda Dose's ambitions, and as a result, she quite early decided to change her place of residence. Her new home became the settlement of Redwater in Texas, which had a population of only about 800 people. During this life period, Amanda attempted to build family relationships and create a complete family. As a result of marriage, in August 1999, her firstborn was born, a girl named Guinevere, whom her family tenderly called Gwen. The child was distinguished by an extraordinarily calm character. Over time, the growing Gwen became an active participant in the Scout movement during her studies at the local high school. Her environment remembered her as an extremely caring and responsible personality in any life manifestations. She was characterized by absolute selflessness. Once, when the girl was 9 years old, she donated all the money and toys received on her birthday to a children's shelter, repeating this act the following year. For years after the firstborn's birth, a second descendant appeared in the family, a boy named Tejas, born in 2003. The child resembled his older sister in many ways. He also loved helping others and soon became a scout in the local Redwater school. Between the children, extraordinarily close, warm relations developed. For local residents, Amanda's family embodied a classic example of an American family. However, a few years before the described events, the marriage fell apart. The children remained living with their mother, who made maximum efforts to ensure comprehensive education and full support for her children, working almost without respite. During difficult domestic moments, the woman was helped by a 16-year-old nanny named Rachel, who got along wonderfully with the children, unsuspecting of the cruel fate approaching this lovely family. May 11, 2011, seemed like an entirely ordinary day for this family. At that moment, the 34-year-old woman, being divorced, lived with her children in a cozy house in a quiet suburb. That evening, the family planned a usual scenario, a shared dinner, watching TV shows, and a calm bedtime. Everything was proceeding as expected. The children spent time together effortlessly and went to their sleeping places. However, at 3 o'clock in the morning, this idyllic silence was shattered by a horrific event. Amanda's parents received a phone call that would forever change their lives. Later, they would recall this moment through tears, as initially, it was difficult to make out anything through the wild children's crying. In the receiver, Gwen's uncontrollable weeping could be heard, with a terrifying noise in the background. Suddenly, the connection was cut off. Futile attempts to call their daughter and grandchildren only intensified the parental anxiety. The agitated elderly people instantly got into their car, striving to reach their daughter's house as quickly as possible and clarify the reason for their alarm. However, they were too late. From afar, a huge blazing fire could be seen, which had engulfed the residential house. The couple immediately parked the car and without hesitation rushed inside the burning structure. In the smoke-filled living room, they found an unconscious Gwen. Risking their own lives, the parents carried the girl outside, sustaining numerous burns in the process. Unfortunately, the child showed no signs of life. The elderly couple, injured and shocked by the tragedy, called emergency services. Medics provided first aid to the victims and urgently hospitalized the couple due to the severity of their burns. Doctors pronounced Gwen dead immediately upon delivery to the medical facility. Firefighters battled the blaze for over 3 hours. Only at dawn were they able to completely extinguish the flame, which had practically entirely destroyed the house. The worst part was that the fire had destroyed almost all potential evidence of what had occurred. The initial site investigation began with the standard version of an electrical equipment malfunction. However, further investigation dramatically changed the investigative hypothesis. During a thorough examination, human remains of the other family members were discovered. The condition of the bodies immediately pointed to a far more horrific scenario than an ordinary fire. 34-year-old Amanda, 11-year-old Gwen, and 8-year-old Tejas had been subjected to cruel and brutal murder. Each of them had been fatally stabbed. Forensic experts unequivocally confirmed that death occurred before the fire started. No traces of soot were found in the victims' respiratory tracts, which unequivocally testified to a violent death prior to the house's ignition. Law enforcement immediately mobilized all available forces to conduct the investigation. Detectives began a meticulous examination of the tragedy site, paying special attention to the charred house and the victims' bodies. A crucial moment was establishing that the bodies of Amanda and her children were the source of the fire. Criminalists hypothesized the use of a special combustible substance by the perpetrator. Most likely, the offender had sprayed furniture, walls, and floors with a highly flammable liquid, which explained the extraordinary intensity and duration of the fire that was so difficult for rescuers to control. Specialists from the forensic department meticulously examined every centimeter of the ashes in search of the smallest pieces of evidence. It immediately became obvious that the version about an electrical equipment malfunction was completely unfounded. The arson had a clearly planned nature, obviously intended to conceal the traces of the triple murder. Law enforcement launched a large-scale information campaign. Through mass media, a reward of $40,000 was announced for any information that would help identify the cruel murderer. The local community was in a state of shock. It seemed absolutely incredible that anyone could wish death upon Amanda, a woman known to everyone as an extremely kind and courteous person. Detectives conducted dozens of interviews among neighbors and relatives of the deceased, trying to find even the slightest hint of a possible motive for the crime. However, all efforts proved futile. No useful information could be obtained. Almost 3 weeks of active searching passed. Hundreds of phone calls from random witnesses poured in hourly. People hoped to receive the reward, but no significant data capable of advancing the investigation arrived. On the 4th week of the investigation, when it seemed the case had reached a dead end, an unexpected phone call came from a woman in California. Her testimony was explosive. For safety reasons, the caller's identity was decided not to be disclosed in the investigation materials. The woman claimed that the family's murder was committed by 17-year-old Rachel Pittman, the family's former nanny. Initially, the version seemed implausible. However, the woman provided such specific details that could only be known to the investigation, which instantly increased trust in her testimony. Law enforcement took the received information with maximum seriousness, immediately beginning an in-depth study of all available materials. A unique aspect of this case was an unexpected circumstance. The crime committed in Texas became known from a person living thousands of kilometers away, in California. Naturally, a logical question arose: where could this person have obtained such information? Predictably, the unknown individual was carefully checked against all available databases. The verification result turned out to be completely clean. The task arose to conduct a more detailed questioning, but due to the significant geographical distance, this process became protracted. Weeks of investigation were dedicated to carefully monitoring and verifying all testimonies coming to the police department. During this period, detectives managed to establish contact and have a conversation with a girl named Rachel, who was previously considered a potential suspect in the triple murder. During communication, detectives found no suspicious moments. The girl categorically denied her involvement in the crime, being in a state of deep shock from the tragic events. She knew the affected family well and could not even imagine who could have committed such a cruel crime against the woman and her children. According to her own words, for a long time she had been a close friend of Amanda and her children, regularly caring for Gwen and Tejas, as a result of which extremely warm relationships had developed between her and the family. Rachel had never heard of any conflicts or tensions in Amanda's life that could have caused such a tragedy. According to her characterization, Amanda was an extremely calm, loving mother, and her children were exemplary. Eventually, investigators concluded that Rachel, given her young age and mild character, was unlikely to be a suspect in the triple murder. The girl sincerely and emotionally experienced the tragedy, fully cooperating with the investigation. Her involvement in the crime was assessed as minimal, so law enforcement continued searching among other acquaintances and friends of the victims. This painstaking work continued for about 3 months but did not bring the investigation closer to solving the crime. With the support of various funds, the reward for information increased by an additional $100,000. An unexpected turn occurred not due to financial motivation. Likely, pangs of conscience forced the criminal to make a shocking statement. Approximately 3 months after the brutal murder of the single mother and her children, a woman approached the police department. She was literally emotionally shattered, barely containing a flood of tears. According to her words, just a few minutes ago, her 17-year-old daughter, the same nanny Rachel, who occasionally visited her mother, confessed to committing the triple murder. One of her recent visits had a completely different purpose than ordinary communication. The burden of responsibility for her actions had become unbearable for the girl. She could no longer hide the terrible truth about that tragic night when her friend's house burned down. This truth turned out to be far more horrifying than any of the investigators' assumptions. Rachel candidly confessed to her mother that she was the one who attacked the family that fatal night and then deliberately set the dwelling on fire to conceal the traces of the crime. Rachel's mother was in a state of shock, unable to imagine such cruelty from her own daughter. The maternal instinct that usually compels one to unconditionally protect a child was powerless this time. The details of the crime committed by the 17-year-old girl were too gruesome, too terrible. Therefore, the woman made a difficult but ultimately correct decision, to turn her daughter over to law enforcement. The confession guaranteed her a reward of $140,000. However, she categorically refused the monetary compensation. She was not driven by self-interest, but by the desire to act morally right and ensure the punishment of the criminal, even if it was her own daughter. The investigators, who had previously been in contact with Rachel's mother, immediately set out to detain the suspect. The girl surrendered without the slightest resistance. This criminal story contained far more strange circumstances than might have seemed at first glance. While in custody, the suspect provided detailed testimony about the course of events on that fatal night. According to her, that evening her friend called her. The conversation seemed ordinary, but at the end, an unexpected categorical order was issued to kill Amanda. Her friend spoke as if this matter was extremely urgent and exceptionally important, without going into any explanations. It seemed that the crime had been planned in advance, with Rachel meant to be the executor of the plan. Initially, the girl intended to wait for a moment when the single mother's children would not be at home to avoid killing them. However, her friend proved to be categorical and demanded immediate decisive action. Eventually, Rachel decided to act immediately, despite the children's presence. The fire was also not accidental. The girl clearly understood that murders would inevitably leave evidence that could lead the police to the trail, so she consciously set the fire to destroy any material evidence of the crime. The entire crime was meticulously prepared in advance. On her way to her friend's dwelling, Rachel purchased a bottle of carbonated water, which she completely emptied, and then refilled with gasoline at the nearest gas station. After brutally killing the children and their mother, the girl doused each body with a highly flammable liquid and set them on fire, hoping to permanently destroy any evidence of the crime. However, a mere confession was insufficient to guarantee prosecution of the criminal. It seemed the case without direct evidence might reach a dead end, but the perpetrator made a fatal mistake. During the commission of the triple murder, she accidentally wounded herself with a knife. Despite setting the house on fire, hoping to destroy all internal evidence, when fleeing, she jumped over a fence, leaving a bloody trace from her hand. Despite all attempts to erase it, blood traces remained. Evidence and materials were carefully collected and analyzed in the forensic laboratory. The examination proved with 100% certainty that the blood on the fence belonged to Rachel. The young criminal actually had every chance to escape justice. She managed to kill 3 people without appearing on any surveillance cameras and completely avoiding witness attention. Returning home after the crime, the girl removed all her clothing and burned it along with her shoes. She hid the knife in the forest, first breaking it, and destroyed the wooden handle with fire along with the clothes. During the search operation in the specified forest area where the murder weapon was supposed to be located, detectives failed to find it. However, they managed to almost completely collect the leather wrapping from the knife handle, which bore clear fingerprints of Rachel. Despite all this valuable information that would become the basis of the accusation, the prosecutor believed that this crime concealed something much deeper. The level of preparation and knowledge of evidence concealment methods suggested a carefully planned crime. Everything did not resemble an impulsive act of a teenager who was persuaded or forced to commit a crime. Some experts suggested that at least one more participant was involved, an unknown accomplice who remained unnoticed throughout the entire legal proceedings. According to these specialists, this could have been the same unknown woman who first drew law enforcement's attention to Rachel. Investigators established contact and conducted an interrogation with this mysterious person. From the limited information available to the public, it became known that the informant did not have an obvious motive for negative attitudes towards Amanda. The long-standing friendship between the women made her reaction to Reka's accusation particularly shocking. Her categorical denial of involvement in the execution of the mother and children was confirmed by successfully passing a polygraph test. Law enforcement did not include her in the circle of suspects, as they had no substantial grounds to consider her involved in the crime. Further investigations only ultimately confirmed the absence of her involvement in the tragic events. The next logical step was a psychiatric examination of Rachel herself due to her extremely non-standard behavior. It was necessary to thoroughly clarify her level of sanity, as her mental state could completely nullify the previously given confession. The most intriguing and simultaneously suspicious moment was Reka's statement that an older friend had forced her to commit the crime. The police could not verify the very fact of such a conversation. Even detective records contained no hint of incitement to illegal actions. Immediately before the tragedy, they had communicated, but exclusively about mundane life issues. Most likely, the killer had simply invented this story about coercion, which raised serious concerns about her mental health. Several highly qualified psychiatric experts were immediately involved in working with the girl. The specialists unanimously concluded the presence of serious neuropsychiatric disorders. Rachel was unshakably convinced of the reality of an imaginary conversation in which she was allegedly ordered to kill the mother and children. The described symptoms unequivocally pointed to a deep mental deviation, maximally close to the schizophrenic spectrum. In such clinical cases, patients can experience auditory hallucinations, pursue obsessive ideas, and completely lose control over reality. Such a mental state makes a person extremely dangerous, which Rachel vividly demonstrated. A fundamentally important question arose: what fate awaited a criminal with such serious psychiatric diagnoses? She had real prospects of avoiding prison, receiving mandatory treatment, which was categorically undesirable for the prosecution. Experts meticulously analyzed the available case materials. It was entirely obvious that the criminal had acted consciously. She had extremely carefully planned each step, completely destroyed all potential evidence, and could have avoided justice if her internal moral compass had not unexpectedly kicked in. Rachel was entirely aware of the scale of the crime committed, which was evidenced by her consistent actions to conceal the traces. The girl clearly understood the potential legal consequences of the triple murder and attempted to maximize her protection from possible punishment. The defense side engaged highly qualified psychiatric experts who were expected to significantly influence the judicial proceedings. The professional physician, speaking in Rachel's defense, asserted that her mental perception of reality was critically distorted. The expert insisted that the girl could perceive her own actions as the only correct ones and was inclined to believe in her lack of legal responsibility at the moment of committing the crime. Attention was drawn to the unique terminology that, according to Rachel's claims, was supposedly communicated to her by mystical voices during conversations. She maintained that her goal was to liberate Amanda from suffering. Psychiatrists explained that patients with mental disorders close to the schizophrenic spectrum often lose the ability to differentiate between good and evil, although their actions may appear entirely logical and conscious. This psychological profile explained the girl's extraordinarily meticulous behavior regarding the destruction of crime evidence. The defense even suggested the possibility of the involvement of other persons, but the doctor firmly stated that Rachel had independently constructed the entire criminal plan. The psychiatrist devoted numerous hours to a deep study of the patient's mental state. It was established that the 17-year-old Rachel had long suffered from complex hallucinatory disorders. According to her own testimony, even inanimate objects, shop windows and advertising structures, addressed her. Moreover, random passers-by, in her opinion, were whispering the necessity of liberating Amanda from suffering. Gradually, the hallucinations transformed into an obsessive idea that constantly echoed in her consciousness. Rachel began to perceive this as a mystical message, as if the entire universe was urging her to commit the crime. The final trigger was a phone call from a friend and subsequent mental exacerbation. The mental disorders had a progressive nature. There were periods when the girl heard snake voices, and subsequently began hearing demonic sounds and seeing ghosts. In one of her most vivid hallucinations, she described pink clouds that supposedly stole the souls of future victims. Madness developed at a rapid pace. In fact, Rachel created her own internal world where she maintained constant dialogue with demonic entities inhabiting her consciousness. Despite the obvious mental deviations, the accused was tried as an adult due to the exceptionally grave nature of the crime. At the same time, in the state under such circumstances, she was not facing the death penalty. In 2013, during the court hearing, Rachel agreed to enter into a plea deal with the prosecution to potentially mitigate her sentence. According to her statements, around 3 a.m, she arrived at the home of her longtime friend Amanda and woke her up. The homeowner, a single mother, descended from the second floor to determine who was disturbing her family at such a late hour. Unexpectedly, it turned out to be 17-year-old Rachel Pittman, a person who had repeatedly stayed to babysit Amanda's children. Their long-standing friendship had made her almost a family member, and the woman greeted her with sincere, open arms. To her children, Rachel was something akin to an older sister. It seemed that one could hardly imagine a less dangerous person. However, this time Rachel had come with anything but good intentions. Despite the late hour, the single mother gladly let the familiar person inside. Rachel immediately offered Amanda a drink. The girl was slightly intoxicated and wanted to discuss urgent matters, to which her friend immediately agreed. For a long time, strange characteristics had been observed in Rachel's behavior. It seemed that she practically did not distinguish between the boundaries of reality and fiction. At first, they simply conversed, drinking just a little, literally a small glass of wine. Later, the babysitter began a serious conversation. She intended to share information that she considered critically important. According to her claims, someone was plotting something evil against Amanda and her children. They discussed this problem in detail, but ultimately concluded that it was all mere fabrications. After some time, the unexpected guest prepared to leave. They went to the living room. Rachel said goodbye to Amanda, stood up, and headed towards the doors. But literally a step from the exit, she suddenly turned around sharply. Instantly drawing a knife hidden at her waistband, she swiftly attacked the homeowner. A fierce struggle with screams began. Rachel inflicted several fatal knife wounds on Amanda, instantly cutting short her life. Due to the loud screams and sounds of the struggle, the children woke up. They came to the living room to find out what was happening. The girl was the first to realize the critical danger. Grabbing a mobile phone, she managed to escape to a distant room. Fleeing from the attacker and attempting to call for help, the girl managed to dial a phone number. However, to her great misfortune, instead of emergency services, she reached her grandmother and grandfather. The momentary hope for rescue quickly came to an end. The attacker caught up with the child and brutally killed her. The fate of the younger brother was also awaiting a tragic moment. Rachel Pittman was in a state of cruel uncertainty regarding the children's subsequent fate. She pondered whether she would have left them alive if they had unexpectedly appeared in the living room and witnessed the attack on their mother. Perhaps she would have simply left the premises without causing harm to the minors. However, the opposite was not excluded, as her plan involved complete elimination of evidence by staging a fire. As part of the plea deal with Justis, Rachel pleaded guilty to all charges and refused any appeal of the sentence. The court sentenced her to life imprisonment with a potential possibility of conditional early release after 3 decades. The defense insisted that the sentence was a consequence of her complex mental disorders. Contrary to numerous protests, the 17-year-old teenager was sent to a juvenile correctional facility. However, literally immediately, her mental state began to rapidly deteriorate. In a short period of time, Rachel organized a genuine criminal cult within the institution. Juvenile offenders quickly rallied around her, perceiving her as a charismatic missionary. The girl preached the idea of total forgiveness, the achievement of which, in her belief, required harsh and morally distorted actions. Unfortunately, young criminals very willingly accepted her manipulative rhetoric. Rachel managed to involve several teenagers in her group. One of the cult's primary directives was a demonstrative disrespect towards the correctional facility's staff. These instructions led to numerous conflicts between inmates, which only worsened the already complex criminal situation among juvenile offenders. For the institution's staff, it immediately became evident how dangerous this girl was. Externally, she seemed entirely sane and balanced, especially during calm conversations on neutral topics. However, the slightest criticism would instantly provoke an emotional breakdown in her. The moment someone made a remark or pointed out the incorrectness of her actions, she would immediately lose any loyalty to the interlocutor, transforming neutral relationships into outright hostility. Her categorical rejection of any observations turned Rachel into an absolutely uncontrollable person, causing the facility's staff to constantly remain in a state of heightened alertness. Rachel's behavior from the moment of her imprisonment was considered extremely destructive. She remained in the juvenile correctional facility until 2012, demonstrating persistent antisocial behavior. During this period, the girl initiated numerous conflicts with other inmates, including one instance where she brutally beat a teenager, knocking out his teeth. She repeatedly attempted escapes using the most unexpected methods. On one occasion, Rachel used ordinary paper to block the cell door, creating the possibility of unobstructed exit at any moment. Facility staff uncovered her plot against another inmate whom she planned to attack. On another day, when the girl intended to commit another crime, she nearly managed to obtain a pencil sharpener blade to create an improvised knife. On the eve of a potential fight, she even cut her hair, making it impossible to use as a means of physical influence. By the end of her stay in the juvenile correctional facility, staff unanimously concluded about the critical necessity of medical intervention. Rachel exhibited a dangerous combination of aggression, complete absence of fear, and extraordinary intelligence. According to the guards, the only possible solution was a psychiatric hospital capable of neutralizing her destructive behavior. After a series of incidents, the girl was transferred to an adult women's prison in Texas. As of the present moment, no positive changes in her condition have been observed. The criminal with pronounced mental deviations continues to manipulate her surroundings. She is set to serve a life sentence, but will become eligible for conditional early release. The local community anxiously awaits the potential release of this particularly dangerous murderer. Many circumstances in the case remain unclear. In particular, the motive for such a brutal murder remains incomprehensible, as Rachel was a longtime friend of the family, whom everyone trusted. What could have caused such uncontrolled aggression in her? Part of the public still believes that the girl could not have independently planned and executed such an elaborate murder, suggesting the existence of an unidentified accomplice. Against the background of her mental illnesses, perhaps her only conscious act was the meticulous concealment of crime evidence. The convict's attorney claims that law enforcement attempted to close the case as quickly as possible without conducting a proper investigation. The prosecution, however, insists on the weight of the collected evidence, which unequivocally points to the guilt of the underage defendant. After communicating with Rachel's older friend, she did not name any other persons involved in the crime. The case was so shocking to the local community that residents still recall the bloody massacre with horror and anxiously await the release of this dangerous criminal. Catherine Gowing, an experienced veterinarian from Ireland, for whom the profession was not just a job, but a true calling. At the time of these events, she was 37 years old, a period of professional ability and personal maturity. Her life was closely connected with nature, travel, and caring for animals. The woman lived in the picturesque outskirts of Wales in the United Kingdom, where she jointly rented a spacious house with her friend Jane Doyle. An unexpected and tragic event, which will be discussed further, deeply shook the local community. The town of Moult, located in the north of Wales, had about 10,000 inhabitants. It was a typical British settlement with developed infrastructure, cozy restaurants, traditional pubs, a lively market, and various shops. It was here that Catherine Gowing settled, a representative of a famous Irish farming family, born in 1975. Catherine's parents, although they had stepped back from active farming, continued to support the rural way of life. Her father had once left direct farming activities, while her mother worked as a teacher. Children in this family were involved in agricultural work from an early age, which cultivated diligence and respect for the land. Summer vacations turned into a real school of life, where each family member had their own responsibilities. Her love for animals and nature manifested extremely early. The family farm became her first professional laboratory, where she learned the skills of communicating with her smaller brothers. The dream of becoming a veterinarian matured gradually, but consistently and purposefully. Catherine's educational path was distinguished by remarkable determination. Studying at St. Brennan School, and then at the public college in Bury, demonstrated her extraordinary abilities. Among students, she stood out not only with excellent grades but also with the depth of scientific thinking. A notable moment was during final exams, when she ranked third in the country for natural sciences. The talented student received a unique opportunity to continue her studies at Budapest University, which became a true breakthrough in her professional development. It was within the walls of this institution that fate brought her together with Jane Dow, a compatriot who would later become her closest friend and colleague. Catherine and Jane's student life was filled with bright moments, joint learning, leisure, student parties, and genuine friendship. Their kinship manifested not only in their common origin but also in professional interests. Both entirely dedicated themselves to veterinary medicine. After graduating from the university, fate led Jane to a veterinary clinic in Moult, where she quickly adapted and soon proposed a position to her friend. Catherine was received extremely warmly. Her professionalism, communication skills, and love for animals immediately won over her colleagues. Catherine's professional portrait was distinguished by a unique ability to find common ground with the most challenging patients. Her hands healed, and her gaze calmed the most frightened creatures. In the veterinary community, she was considered not just a doctor, but a true healer. Catherine's professional abilities extended far beyond purely medical skills. Her natural talent as a psychologist allowed her to easily establish contact not only with animals but also with their owners. Her unique approach to communication and deep understanding of patients' emotional states made her exceptionally popular among the city's residents. Financial circumstances forced the girls to seek more economical housing. The clinic provided temporary accommodation, but it did not satisfy the friends. Soon they found a compromise solution. They rented a shared house in the village of De Brayton, located just a 5-minute drive from their workplace. The year 2012 was a period of flourishing for Catherine. She turned 37 years old, with 2 years of successful work at the veterinary clinic and an impeccable reputation behind her. Her appearance was attractive, a soft Irish accent, a charming smile, and natural grace. Despite numerous proposals, Catherine consciously postponed starting a family, completely dedicating herself to her profession. Her friend Jane was in a serious relationship and was planning a trip to Ireland. The purpose of the visit was not only to see her relatives but also to seriously discuss a possible relocation. Jane's elderly parents needed support and care, so she was considering the option of returning to her homeland. Catherine, as always, showed maximum support and agreed to cover for her friend at work. The relationship between the girls was based on deep trust and mutual assistance. She could not even imagine that this ordinary service would turn into a true tragedy. Friday, October 12, 2012, began for Catherine like a typical workday. At 8 p.m., she finished her shift and immediately went to the local grocery store. Video surveillance cameras recorded her at 8:06 p.m. at the entrance. Her appearance was clearly documented: blue jeans, a brown zipper jacket, and a bright brown shoulder bag. For about 30 minutes, she moved through the store aisles, after which she was captured by the camera again, this time at the exit. In her hands, Catherine held an Asda supermarket bag in a pizza box. This moment turned out to be the last recorded instance of her alive. Since Catherine lived alone, her disappearance did not immediately attract attention. The meeting scheduled for the upcoming Sunday with a colleague for a shared lunch did not take place. Catherine did not make any contact, ignoring phone calls. Her colleague, well acquainted with her character, felt serious concern but initially assumed that perhaps the girl was simply ill. The critical situation was fully revealed when Jane returned from Ireland on Sunday evening. The friend discovered many strange circumstances: unlocked front doors, the absence of Catherine's car, and a complete lack of her personal belongings. Particularly alarming was the excessive smell of cleaning products in the premises. No keys, handbag, wallet, or mobile phone were found. Jane, exhausted from her long journey, initially did not pay much attention to Catherine's absence. She assumed that her friend had unexpectedly decided to visit relatives and would return soon. Tired from the trip, the woman decided to rest, planning to clarify all the details the next day. The morning brought increasing concern. Examining the house, Jane found no signs of Catherine's return. Phone calls and messages remained unanswered. Hoping to find her friend at work, she went to the veterinary clinic. The clinic administration showed considerable anxiety. It was known that Catherine had not been in contact since Friday. Sporadic and fragmented text messages received by several employees seemed extremely suspicious and uncharacteristic of the missing woman. After brief discussions, they decided to contact law enforcement. Jane spent the entire day in futile attempts to contact her friend. Immediately after work, she went to the police station, where she detailed the last known events. Her testimony immediately removed any suspicions about her. Particular attention was paid to Catherine's missing car, which could be the key to solving the case. The investigation began immediately. Police interviewed friends and acquaintances of the missing woman. Everyone unanimously noted her extraordinary responsibility and the impossibility of disappearing without warning. This only intensified concerns about her fate. Video recordings from surveillance cameras helped trace Catherine's route from the clinic to the store. However, after leaving the parking lot, her trail disappeared. No additional information was recorded. Catherine's parents in Ireland were immediately informed about their daughter's disappearance. They assured that they had not seen or spoken to her in recent days. Her sister and brother-in-law urgently arrived in Wales to join the search. Through mass media, the family appealed to the public to provide any information about the missing woman. However, by October 16, no useful testimony had been received. Investigators increasingly leaned towards the version of a violent crime, as Catherine had not made contact. The crime scene investigation revealed a number of strange circumstances. Despite the absence of blood traces, forensic experts found fresh male DNA samples on the bedding in a piece of fabric tied to the bed frame. There was speculation about the presence of an unknown man in the house at the moment of disappearance. Jane categorically denied the existence of any romantic relationships for Catherine at that time. They were such close friends that no intimate story could have escaped her attention. Moreover, Catherine's character would not have allowed her to enter into intimate relations with a random man. The version of a violent intrusion was gaining more and more weight. This was evidenced by the unlocked front doors and traces of an unknown person in the house. Forensic experts carefully collected all available DNA samples for further laboratory research. On the evening of October 14, during Jane's futile attempts to reach her friend, 46-year-old Clive Sharp, her ex-boyfriend, with whom they had a serious argument before her departure, unexpectedly responded. Clive Sharp tried to attract Jane's attention by demonstrating a new car and an unexpected gift. However, the woman was too worried about her friend's disappearance to pay him any attention. Their relationship had lasted several months and began through a dating app. The 46-year-old sales consultant lived approximately 150 kilometers from the friend's house but frequently visited Jane. Despite a formal acquaintance with Catherine, Clive often visited their house. There was a hidden tension between them. Catherine openly did not accept the man, feeling uncomfortable with his presence. She deliberately avoided communicating with him, trying to immediately leave the room during his visits. Characteristically, she concealed her true feelings from her friend to avoid creating a conflict situation. Catherine's relatives told the police about her repeated complaints regarding Clive during telephone conversations. This information immediately attracted the investigators' attention, who began a thorough examination of the man's personality. Literally the next day after Catherine was reported missing, the police arrested Clive Sharp. However, due to a lack of direct evidence, including the absence of a body, they could not file official charges. Investigators obtained permission to search his vehicle and sent samples for genetic expertise. Checking Clive Sharp's dossier revealed shocking details of his criminal biography. His total prison sentence amounted to 14 years. Criminal activity began in adolescence. At 16, he sent letters and displayed aggression towards underage girls. At 17, Clive was sentenced to 3 years of imprisonment for raping a 15-year-old girl, whom he threatened by squeezing her throat with a glass. After release, the man supposedly reformed. He married, had a daughter, and for some time did not come to law enforcement's attention. Clive's family life was dramatic. His wife Gillian suffered from drug addiction and soon died. In 1994, when he was 26, he again found himself behind bars, this time for an attack on his friend's wife. The punishment term was 3 years. Soon after release, Clive committed another serious crime. He attacked a woman, tied her up, raped her while f***ing with a knife. This time the prison sentence was 8 years, but after 5 years the man was released on parole. 2003 was marked by another marriage, which collapsed by 2011. At the time of Catherine's disappearance, Clive was in a tense relationship with her friend Jane. Investigators believed that the coincidence was too eloquent to be random. Based on the collected materials, suspect Clive Sharp was detained in custody. During a specific period, Clive became part of a special rehabilitation program in a penitentiary institution, aimed at helping the criminal overcome his dangerous psychological impulses. During group sessions, the man openly revealed the darkest corners of his distorted psyche. The scale of his psychopathological behavior was analyzed in detail. It was discovered that he derived perverted satisfaction from binding women, committing sexual violence, and continuously intimidating them. In his sadistic fantasies after committing a crime, he considered 2 possible scenarios, either indifferently releasing the victim or planning their final physical destruction. His most brutal fantasies involved strangling victims to the point of biological death or drowning them. It is important to emphasize that this program ceased functioning in 2017. Its cancellation was a consequence of compelling evidence of the complete ineffectiveness of methods influencing the psyche of rapist maniacs. Moreover, it was established that such gatherings essentially transformed into an informal criminal association. Group meetings became so absurd that participants openly discussed murder technologies, methods of concealing crimes, and brazenly exchanged criminal experiences. On the eve of his detention, Clive categorically denied any involvement in the incident. He claimed to have an unquestionable alibi regarding Catherine's disappearance, allegedly spending that weekend visiting relatives. Strangely, his daughter and son-in-law confirmed this version, assuring investigators that they saw the suspect and he looked entirely calm. However, this circumstance did not exclude the possibility that Clive had sufficient time to commit the crime. According to the reconstructed sequence of events, he could have first dealt with Catherine, hidden her body, and then proceeded to visit his relatives. Law enforcement meticulously studied all available materials, aiming to find logical inconsistencies in the suspect's story. Investigators quickly established that Clive Sharp was deliberately providing false information. By that moment, genetic expertise results of biological materials found on the missing woman's bed had arrived. The examination demonstrated a 100% match with the suspect's biological materials. This unequivocally proved that he had been in the missing woman's premises and had intimate contact with Catherine. At the same time, law enforcement had no doubts that the intimacy occurred without mutual consent, as the woman had previously avoided contacts with this man. Simultaneously, large-scale search operations continued, both for the missing woman and her potential remains. At that moment, almost no one expected a positive scenario or believed in Catherine's potential rescue after encountering such a dangerous criminal as Clive, who openly fantasized about murder. Fateful information was obtained 2 days later. A young couple, exploring the area near the abandoned Pinflin quarry, located 5 kilometers from Catherine's residence, discovered her completely burned vehicle. They immediately informed law enforcement. The call came on October 18. Despite serious vehicle damage, leaving only a metal frame, forensic experts quickly identified it as the missing woman's property. By this point, information about the potential murder of the local veterinarian had spread throughout the county. However, no human remains were found inside the car, nor any additional physical evidence. Under these circumstances, final hopes for Catherine's rescue effectively disappeared. Clive Sharp continued to insist on his innocence. On October 19, the prosecutor's office, after analyzing the available evidence, decided to file official murder charges against Catherine Hallwink. Despite the absence of a body, preparations began for the future court proceedings, which, according to predictions, would be lengthy and controversial. The prosecution was aware of the case's complexity and maximally focused on gathering convincing evidence of the defendant's guilt. Search operations continued. Groups carefully examined territories adjacent to Catherine's house and the locations where the burned car was found. Law enforcement, volunteers, aerial support, and specially trained service dogs were involved in the search. Divers simultaneously examined all surrounding water bodies, hoping to find even the slightest clue. The investigation faced significant challenges. Without a body, proving murder beyond reasonable doubt would require exceptional evidence. Forensic experts conducted multiple examinations of the burned vehicle, hoping to find trace evidence that could confirm Catherine's presence or fate. Local media began extensively covering the case, which quickly became a sensation. The mysterious disappearance of a respected veterinarian, combined with the suspect's disturbing criminal history, captured public attention. People from surrounding areas joined voluntary search groups, providing additional resources to law enforcement. Jane, Catherine's friend, became a key witness. Her emotional testimony and detailed account of their last interactions provided crucial context for investigators. She remained determined to uncover the truth about her friend's disappearance, refusing to accept the growing possibility of her death. On October 7, 2013, Clive Sharp continued to deny his involvement in the murder. However, investigative measures quickly refuted his version of events. Divers discovered human remains near an abandoned quarry, directly beside the previously found burnt-out vehicle. Initially, 2 fragments of a human body were found, carelessly wrapped in plastic bags, the right hand and right leg. Soon after, approximately 3 kilometers from the original search location, a human torso was discovered in a body of water. All extracted biological remains were immediately sent to an expert laboratory for thorough examination. Forensic experts soon established an irrefutable fact: the discovered anatomical fragments belonged to the missing Catherine Gowing. This conclusion definitively ended any hopes for her rescue. Despite extensive search efforts in the water body, no additional body remains were found. One part of the body was solemnly sent to the deceased's homeland, Ireland, where her family resided. In her hometown of Cooney, County Offaly, a memorial ceremony was held. Over 300 people gathered to bid farewell to Catherine. So many wished to support her relatives and honor the memory of a bright woman who was loved by both people and animals. The criminal trial against the perpetrator began on February 14, 2013, and took an unexpected turn. On his lawyer's advice, Sharp unexpectedly pleaded guilty at the very beginning of the court hearings. This significantly simplified the judicial procedure and allowed the victim's family to avoid prolonged exhausting legal battles. However, this decision was dictated not by genuine remorse, but by purely pragmatic considerations. The prosecution had such a convincing array of evidence that the defendant essentially had no chance of acquittal. The evidence included absolutely everything, from fingerprints to unique splinters used to bind the victim, with identical splinters also found in the criminal's vehicle. Despite formally admitting guilt, the experienced criminal categorically refused to provide detailed explanations about the events in the house and the circumstances of Catherine's murder. Instead, the prosecution presented their own version of events, meticulously reconstructed based on the collected evidence. According to the prosecutor, the crime was planned and committed on October 12, 2012. Clive Sharp, thoroughly knowing Catherine's daily routine, deliberately waited for a moment when she would be alone. It is quite probable that the defendant had nurtured criminal intent towards the woman who consistently ignored his advances. The man had been observing her residence, waiting for a favorable opportunity. When the lights went out in the house, he stealthily entered and suddenly attacked Catherine in her bedroom. Most likely, he immediately tied her to the bed, having first gagged her mouth to prevent her from calling for help. The criminal repeatedly raped the defenseless woman and then strangled her. It is presumed that he spent the rest of the night in the house next to the victim's body, contemplating his further actions. The next morning, Clive went out to make necessary purchases. Surveillance cameras recorded him in the store where Catherine was last seen alive the day before. There, he bought garbage bags, cleaning supplies, a canister of gasoline, a screwdriver, and a Halloween mask. At a nearby construction store, the man also purchased a saw with several interchangeable blades. Returning to Catherine's residence, he began implementing his monstrous plan, first dismembering the body into separate parts, then carefully packing them into the purchased bags and moving them to his car. Then he started cleaning the crime scene. The murderer cleaned the premises so meticulously and professionally that forensic experts were unable to establish the exact location of the body dismemberment. Afterward, he transported the anatomical fragments and disposed of them by throwing them into a body of water. Later, he destroyed all of Catherine's personal belongings and her car, dousing the interior with gasoline and setting the vehicle on fire. During the investigative actions, additional telling facts were uncovered that definitively exposed the criminal nature of Clive Sharp. Literally the day after the murder, he executed a well-thought-out plan to cover his tracks, selling his old car and purchasing a new one. With this new vehicle, he soon began boasting to Jane during her attempts to clarify the circumstances of her friend's disappearance. Law enforcement managed to trace the fate of the sold vehicle and obtain a warrant for its detailed examination. The search results exceeded all expectations. Fragments of fabric identical to those used by the criminal to bind the victim were found on the vehicle, along with blood stains and Clive's fingerprints. Mobile phone geolocation data additionally confirmed the suspect's presence near the lake and the vehicle's location immediately after the crime. The collected evidence significantly strengthened the prosecution's position and expanded the evidence base for the trial. Clive Sharp categorically refused to comment on or confirm any details of the crimes attributed to him, maintaining a demonstrative silence. During the investigation, another shocking episode of the criminal's biography was established. It turned out that on that fatal evening, Catherine might not have been the only potential victim. Clive had intended to attack another woman towards whom he felt a pronounced sympathy. Around 10 p.m., he unexpectedly appeared near her residence during the same week when Catherine's murder was committed. The woman provided detailed testimony to law enforcement. She admitted that they had indeed previously been intimately involved, but due to the man's excessively rough behavior, she decided to no longer maintain the relationship. That evening, Clive broke into her premises, clearly intending to tie her up and cause harm. However, her determination and demand to immediately cease unlawful actions forced the criminal to retreat. He managed to tie the woman up but then unexpectedly abandoned her without untying her. The investigation presumed that immediately after the failed attack attempt, he headed to Catherine's house, intending to realize his perverted intentions. Around midnight, the suspect parked his car in a hotel parking lot opposite the friend's house, from where the residence of the future victim was clearly visible. Video surveillance cameras recorded his movements, a brief waiting period, a sharp exit from the car, and a purposeful movement towards Catherine's house, apparently when she was already asleep. Within an hour, Clive returned to his car, where he spent about an hour and a half, apparently contemplating what he had done. Around 3 in the morning, he visited Catherine's premises again. For him, this attack was the realization of what the other woman had not allowed. He knew perfectly well that the victim was alone, and the availability of a key to the premises, cordially provided by Jane, significantly facilitated his criminal intentions. Despite the formal admission of guilt, additional details could not be obtained from the defendant. Throughout the trial, he demonstratively sat with his head down, never once looking towards the prosecution representatives or the deceased's family. The court found Clive guilty of Catherine's murder. The prosecution initially demanded at least 42 years of imprisonment. However, taking into account mitigating circumstances, the defendant's confession, the term was reduced to 37 years of imprisonment. After the court hearing, Catherine's sister, Emma, shared her grief with the media. She emphasized that her sister's death was a devastating blow to everyone who knew her. Catherine had dedicated her life to serving and helping others. In her memory, a memorial was established in the Catholic Church, financed by the colleagues from the veterinary clinic where she had worked for a year and a half. The tragedy dealt a devastating psychological blow to her friend Jane, who felt guilty about everything that happened. She blamed herself for meeting Clive, allowing him into her life, and even giving him a key to her own residence. Previously, the man had seemed to her a decent and charming personality who never demonstrated aggression or cruelty. Of course, she could not have anticipated his turbulent criminal past. It turned out he had been hiding his true nature all this time, masking himself like a wolf in sheep's clothing. In deep despair, Jane quit her job at the veterinary clinic and moved to northern England to start life anew. The criminal remains behind bars to this day. Shortly after his latest imprisonment, his mother passed away. The news of her son's actions had a devastating psychological impact on her. Clive's daughter also disowned her father. When he finally is released, he will be 83 years old. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel. Until next time, friends.